Don't be afraid to do things that you don't feel qualified to do, and look for things that other people aren't wanting to do that are needs at that time. The harder the thing is that it sounds, the better it is to go after it.
Welcome to the Voices of Manufacturing, where people share their stories, career journeys, and perspectives on the industry. This podcast is brought to you by Dazuki, empowering the frontline manufacturing workforce. And now, here is your host, Name Tag Scott.
Welcome to another episode of the Voices of Manufacturing podcast. I'm your host, Name Tag Scott, and today you are going to love our guest. He's had a diverse and impressive journey in manufacturing, so let me set the stage for you. Starting his career early as a quality engineer at Honeywell Aerospace, he later ventured into the field with Kiewit Industrial with his role as a field engineer. And now for the past 16 years, he has progressed through a bunch of roles at Shaw Industries. He's been a project engineer, a process engineer, a plant engineering manager, and now a staff engineer. So his career is a testament to leadership and to efficiency. And I'm really excited to welcome Jeff Gentry. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Where did you grow up, Jeff?
I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. If you're from there. Most people call it East Knoxville, where I lived. It was the last exit before you head out to Strawberry Plains, Tennessee.
Go Vols. Absolutely.
Go Vols.
Did you have any choice but to go to Tennessee for school?
I probably had choices, but I was really bad at making decisions or commitments back then. Having free room and board at my parents' house when I wasn't on co-ops was the option.
Does Knoxville have any history or renown for manufacturing anything particular?
It did used to before I was born. They were a big textile manufacturing, and there were a lot of mills in the early 1900s through around 1950. But then there was a pretty heavy collapse in the middle of the 50s of that industry.
And are there any remnants, old buildings, or artifacts of that era?
There are definitely a lot of old buildings. Most of that stuff got consumed it became a big wholesaling hub. So jobs were created, but they were pretty low-level jobs because you're basically trading. Things are changing hands for money, and people buy it wholesale and then sell smaller quantities outside of that. So it had a trickle-down effect, but it was not a big manufacturing hub.
And when you were growing up, did you have dreams of going into manufacturing one day?
No, I had dreams of playing Nintendo 12 hours a day, and maybe there might have been like small glimpses of dreaming of manufacturing or engineering.
I guess it depends what Nintendo games you played, because there was a fair amount of building-based Nintendo games, if I recall, from the 80s.
I was a big fan of Tetris, still even at 40 years old. Tetris.
Tetris was the best. Okay, so what are other building games? There was Dig Dug, which was one of my favorite Nintendo games, where the guy was like digging through the ground to find different things.
I don't think I played a ton of building games. I did like puzzle games, though. Anything where you had to solve problems. I probably poured hours into those kind of games like Zelda, Solomon's Key.
Spoken like a true engineer. Of course you like puzzles. That makes sense. I was the opposite. I'm not an engineer. I think Rampage was my favorite Nintendo games because rather than manufacturing things, you got to just destroy buildings.
Break it all. That's right.
Oh, it was the best. When you were growing up in Knoxville, what was your first job?
So my first real job that I could drive myself to was at a golf course called River Islands. And I didn't really have anything substantial that I did there. I washed carts, I parked carts, I cleaned clubs, I picked up golf balls. But I played a ton of golf and was on the high school golf team, so that just seemed like a good fit at that time in life.
Nice. What was your favorite club?
Oh, my favorite club at that time was River Islands. I loved it. It had island holes in the middle of a river, hence the name. And it was hard to play, and there were lots of tight corridors to hit through. You could lose a ton of balls, or you could shoot the round of your life. It was a great place to play.
That's fun. I played high school golf myself. After not making it on the baseball team, I realized golf was a better sport, and what a great high school sport to play. You never hear about that. But
it was a great time in my life, and I had played golf for a really long time. My granddad started me when I was 3. In his backyard, and he used to drive me in his golf cart through a substation because he worked for the utility board onto the course they were members of, and the balls there, and then play a few holes, and that really got me hooked until later in life.
Excellent. Now, you went into manufacturing a little bit later. So talk about like how you first got involved in that industry, even though it wasn't your initial career ambition.
So how I got into engineering and manufacturing specifically is pretty weird scenario, I think. So I loved band in high school. So I started college as a music major, and I majored in music for 2 years. But at the end of my fourth semester, I turned in a I turned in an assignment that was our final in music theory, and I had not heard it yet, and I hadn't used any kind of instruments to write it. I did it all just based on music theory.
Yeah.
And my professor said, "I think you need to try engineering."
Oh,
She said, I really think you should look into it. And so I did. I went that day and changed my major to mechanical engineering.
wow.
I'd had no classes up to that point that had anything to do with that major, but I excelled at the curriculum. So
Huh.
a short few years later, I decided I was going to try to co-op and found Honeywell Aerospace, or they found me. And I got laid off from that, but I'd learned a lot while I was there. They built airfoils for turbine engines,
Cool.
and Shaw picked me up. So that's where I got my start.
What do you think it was about your paper on music theory that your teachers saw that said engineer?
I would bet that there were almost no rules broken. So um, it was all extremely methodical. And it was just, I think there were 7 parts on it. I can't remember exactly. That was 20 years ago. But I definitely remember that I had done it in a way that all the math worked out. Lots of major chords, things were on first, thirds, and fifths. It was very succinct. And I bet that she saw that and knew that there wasn't much emotional inspiration to it. It was,
Right.
this is all going to work. And sure enough, when you play it from a computer, it all
Right.
sounds like those instruments playing. But that I'd not actually given it any creative thought other than I want to make the math work.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. And musicians tend to be one or the other. I'm a musician myself, but I'm very different in that respect as I don't know music theory. I don't know what rules are that I would even know how to break them. And a lot of musicians are either a right brain, left brain person, where take someone like Sting, who like will play like Every Breath You Take is written in G, but the bridge is in E flat. And like, where did that come from?
Yeah, I did not do that on that theory final.
No, if it's in G, the only possibility for a bridge is B minor. You couldn't do anything else. That's awesome. And do you still play music?
I haven't played any music in at least 10 years.
Oh, tragedy.
Yeah, I had a kid, and I think not long before I had a child, I had not been playing much, but I just
Right.
put it down and never picked it back up.
Right. Yeah, I think that happens a lot, especially with kids on the way. Got to understand the priorities. So
For sure.
I was reading through one of your LinkedIn posts about an unconventional engineer, and I thought it was really interesting. You had this framework, like a Venn diagram of an unorthodox path, and I would love for you to share like how you thought about that and what that philosophy means.
What got me thinking about that was probably around 3 years ago. I fairly abruptly changed jobs from, I'd been in facilities my whole life on the operations side, and landed in a support role and started exploring what stuff I really enjoyed or liked, and realized that what I thought was a linear path that I was on, I didn't enjoy nearly as much as I enjoyed something new almost every day. Or
Yeah.
even if it wasn't every day, say 6 months, I did one thing. And then
Mm.
2 weeks later, I found myself in a different building or a different geography or on a completely different project, and they're fairly unrelated principles. So I really like the idea that I'm solving like a new problem or it's new to me. So I felt more, I don't know what the word is, but I found it easier to get into it and want to learn everything about it. Like when you have a hobby, except I was just picking lots of different hobbies that I'm working in. Or I guess they were picked for me, but oh no, I can't hear you.
Thank you. Still working out the kinks on that. So despite working in, say, different departments, buildings, etc., even if the principles are unrelated, do you ever see connections between them?
I definitely do. Physics is physics, and math is usually math, not always, but in practice, everything's a little different than how you put it on paper. But there's definitely similarities to being in operations and being in support. I think they go hand in hand. But a lot of times in the day-to-day operation, you don't have time to make changes or lead large projects that are going to transform your operation, and you're eventually going to run them. But it's two separate entities to really make that work.
So give me a snapshot. What's an example of a project you worked on for a period of time and then a completely different project that would appear to be unrelated?
I could give you a few examples, like going down a timeline. So we were asked to install a reshear line in a facility, and we're going to use mostly used parts and combine a bunch of different equipment from different buildings and brought it in and did that in around 3.5 months. In the last 2 weeks of that project, I was asked to do a different install and a whole different process for heat setting yarn, and had to like change gears and make your brain goes through a little cognitive dissonance of, okay, I was doing that, but now I'm going to be doing something else. And remember a past life when I did manufacture yarn. And then, okay, how does all that equipment go together? What are the heats? Do I need new electrical? There's a wall in the way. So I went from having this clean path in front of me to a bunch of equipment on different trailers that other people had procured in a completely different operation. And then probably not even 12 months later, I found myself learning chemistry because I've now got to put two reactors together so that I can build something that's then going to mix a reaction that then creates it's an exothermic reaction. So it basically produces its own heat in the middle of this reaction. They're all manufacturing, it all makes stuff, but the science principles are the same, but all the operations are different.
Yeah, I could see how that could be disorienting for someone for all of a sudden moving into that new kind of role. How do you manage that change? How do you deal with the transition if it's so abrupt like that?
I wish I could show you what I do, but I'd always kept an activity report, but my activity report shifted to managing me. So when you go from having 120 people on your team to just yourself, my first step was I'll just manage me like I'm a team. And so I started making Word documents. At that time, we were in Google Docs, but I would put all the pertinent links to any information I was using in that month. And I had it by day, by week. And so every day I put a new date down and then start taking my notes and creating links to myself. And so over time, that became like this 3-year history of being able to go back and look at anything I was doing at any moment and then remember, because I can follow these link breadcrumb trails to all the different information. It didn't matter where it was stored. It's on the cloud, right? So I just pulled it to myself. And that became like my go-to way to help me even remember what I had done yesterday or a year ago or whatever the time frame was.
Well, I love the idea of I'll just manage me like I'm a team. Like that's solid. Does that scale? Can you apply the same principle when you have direct reports under you?
I think it does scale. My fear for that would be interrupting somebody else's flow.
Right.
Everybody has a way they like to do things. And I'm sure you've talked to lots of engineers that don't like being told how they should do something.
No, never.
but I do think that it's really important to know what you've done and why you did it and when. And a lot of people in this industry pride remembering things from 10 years ago or knowing the answers and having it all in their head. And I just don't think like that. I'm really good at putting things back together, but I'm really bad at remembering why I was there to begin with. So I think it would have huge implications to efficiency and not making as many mistakes, but convincing other people to do it, because there's an empathetic side to that. Like I get that you don't like how to do this and it is pretty time consuming.
Right. When you started working at Shaw 16 or so years ago, was there a trajectory laid out? Did you have a sense of what the growth path would be?
I felt like there was. And even during the onboarding process, Shaw gives you a lot of that. Like here are the career paths, here's things you can do. And I leaned towards an engineering side of career path. I was almost certain from the first time I co-op that I wanted to land in a plant engineer position. So I had that idea in my head from day 8 or whatever day it was.
Was that inspiring to know that was like the end goal?
For a long time, yes. It was, I'm going to learn everything I can. I'm going to work as many different facilities as I can. I'm going to try to learn who big players are. What can I do to make myself look like I'm somebody who needs to be promoted or that we would like to have? I think my end goal was somebody wanted me to work for them,
right,
and almost be sought out.
Okay, I like what you just said about someone who looks like they could be promoted. Yeah, give me a few snapshots of that. Who is that person that is promotable?
Someone who is self-starting. Sounds a whole lot like an entrepreneurship pitch,
Right.
actually,
I
or a
think so.
solopreneurship pitch. But
Right.
so if you're self-starting, you're curious, and then you have some successes. I think it's really that simple. If you want to do things other people don't want to do, or you'd make yourself want to do things other people don't want to do, and then have some tenacity so that when you hit brick walls, you go ahead and keep moving forward anyway, or learn masonry and start taking the wall down. Do something to just keep moving so that there's a way to be able to show that you're willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done. And then hopefully you're lucky and you get a few pretty tough projects or tough assignments that can showcase that.
You talked about your activity log. Do you also log the successes and victories as well?
Yes, I don't know if I would list them out quite like that, but if something went wrong, there's a lot of bullet points under that log. Because one, I want to know later in case it's something that mattered. But I really, once a month, I read through these. So the month before, and help myself remember what didn't go well or what I could do better next time. Or if I had that to do all over again, my hope is that if something similar ever does pop up, I want to go see everything that I know I don't need to do.
Yeah.
And then that way there's a better launching pad for the next outing, so to speak.
Right. We learn so little from our successes, so the failures are definitely more instructive, right?
Yes.
Does Shaw do a mentoring program or anything pairing you up with someone to help you grow in that way?
So they do have that. I don't think I've ever had an official mentor, but I've had some unofficial mentors.
Yeah.
Actually, I
Okay.
probably stayed in engineering because of that.
Oh, really? Tell me about it.
So Rip Johnston was my first plant manager.
What a name, Rip Johnston. That's incredible.
His real name's Scott. I don't know why his name's Rip.
It's way, as someone named Scott, Rip is a way better name.
So Rip was actually the same reaction was given by most people when they find out his name. Oh, that makes sense. A lot of people would say, "Oh, really rip into you," but he was very militaristic. I don't know if that's the right word. He ran a tight ship,
right?
And I don't know what made him take a liking to me, but he started having weekly one-on-ones with me pretty early on in my career, even though I was many levels removed from him.
Cool.
And like almost like a father figure, I would say. And so I went through a really emotional time early on in my career. And I can vividly remember calling him at 6:00 in the morning. I had a Saturday that I was going to work and I was leading the weekend teams and was going through, have not been asleep since Thursday, and talking to him. And he said, I tell you what, just drink some coffee, get in the car. And he met me at the plant and spent 30 minutes prepping me for the day and really laid out that what's important in life, what's not important in life. And you're going to go through this wave of emotions, but eventually you're going to get on the other side of this. And of course, I'm not one to hear any of that at this point. I'm just like, I don't want to be here. But he just really led me through that to the point that when he left that plant a few years later, I'd looked for any job available that was in the new plant he was in. Right. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what it was. Am I qualified for it? Can I do it? And I was over there, I think, within 3 months.
Wow.
In a process engineer role.
You still kept in touch with Rip?
Yes. I used to eat lunch with him about once a month, and then he moved farther away than just having a lunch meeting was possible. But yeah, we still talk. He's retired now, but we still talk.
Have you had a chance to pay it forward and mentor other young manufacturing professionals?
Yes, at least I think a lot of them would say that. I feel like I have a lot of success stories of people that kind of, tutelage is a weird word to use, but I wanted people to, after he did it for me, I wanted to do it for other people. So I started a thing that I ended up calling Fridays with Jeff.
Nice.
It was almost never on a Friday after the first semester I did it, but it stayed Fridays with Jeff because that's how it had started. And a co-op had asked me, how do I associate what I'm learning at school with what we do here? And I thought that was a really interesting question because it was inquisitive enough to know that, hey, I'm learning all these tools, this math, science, some engineering. How do I apply that to making yarn? Or how do I melt stuff in this matter? And so I started thinking through, it's not just those co-ops. What about like the accounting co-ops and the finance co-ops and the industrial engineering co-ops? And so that morphed itself into not just connecting like some science and physics, but what do you guys want out of life? And then it turned in from mentoring to coaching. So what do you want to learn about? So then it branched into emotional intelligence and disc profile, so that you're going to learn this here, and they're probably going to give it to you in this shop format or in a learning type format. But what does it really mean when you get a disc profile, and how do you use that information?
Right.
So definitely did that. Eventually I got into the Shaw coaching. They call it a master coach. You go through a program and then you get assigned somebody to coach. And I think my favorite part about that is so far it's been people that don't do what I do.
Okay.
It almost like forces you into a non-mentor situation. Right. It has to be coaching at that point because you don't have recommendations to give.
Right. Yeah. Mentors do more modeling. Coaches do more general, helping people guide through essentially any situation.
Yes.
That's fascinating. It's amazing you're able to pay it forward. In my experience, people that are the best mentors, someone mentored them long ago, and it's just part of the chain of leadership. You just have to keep pushing that forward.
Yes. And I probably didn't know, up until RIP, I didn't know that was something that I even cared about doing. And then realized I do care about this. And sometimes I get something out of it and sometimes I don't, but I feel like the other people get a chance to. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that feeling. You realize that, oh, I've had this incredible blessing to have this person, and I see that in other people. You pick people out, you're like, oh, I see myself in you, and I just want to grab them. Let's go.
Yes, I would like more of that, and let's do it. Yes.
Right, yeah. Okay, cool. We have reached the half time at the Voices of Manufacturing, and this is my favorite segment where we go back in time and we find out what happened on this day in manufacturing history. So, Jeff, are you ready to play?
Oh, yes.
On this day, on this day.
Okay. All right. So we're going to crank up the gears. We're going to forge some manufacturing knowledge. And here's how the game works. I'm going to give you 3 pivotal moments in manufacturing history. You have 30 seconds to answer the multiple choice question. And if you get all 3 of them, you will win $1 million Dazuki dollars. That's right. That's our cryptocurrency that doesn't actually exist, but what the hell? Okay, are you ready? Let's do it.
Let's do it.
And I'm going to put the questions in the chat just so you can see them as I'm saying this. Okay, question number 1. On this day in manufacturing history in 1933, Congress passed the 21st Amendment repealing prohibition. As we know, that prevented the manufacturing, sale, and transportation of alcohol. But prior to that, alcohol had been manufactured for thousands of years. So what was the first alcoholic beverage ever manufactured? Was it A, in 7000 BC, ancient pottery jars in China showed fermented wine? Answer B, is it 2500 BC, barley beer was manufactured in the Zagros Mountains of Iran? Or C, in 2000 BC, Mexican farmers manufactured fermented sap in the maguey plant of a drink?
Oh, man, all of those sound completely believable. So I'm going to go with 7000 BC because I figured that's been around since the dawn of time.
That was the answer I also thought. In fact, the correct answer is B, 2500 BC, barley from the mountains of Iran. I know. Tricky. Okay, let's move on.
What did people do before then?
I don't know. I guess opium? I'm not sure. We'll have to do additional research on that. Okay, 1 down, 2 to go. Next question. Paste this in here. Okay, so on this day in manufacturing history, back in 1846, the first practical and widely successful sewing machine was patented by Elias Howe. This is appropriate with your yarn experience. This sewing machine revolutionized the way clothes were manufactured. But the question is, which of the following cliches derived from this invention? Was it A, on pins and needles, B, hanging by a thread, or C, the whole 9 yards?
All right, it can't be the whole 9 yards because that came from ammunition. But I'm not sure about the other 2.
Good reasoning.
I think it's going to be hanging on by a thread.
Absolutely, hanging on by a thread. Answer B is correct. And you got it. Whole 9 yards is ammunition based. So well done. Okay, 1 out of 2 so far. Still one question left to go. Here it is. Question number 3. On this day in manufacturing history, back in 1782, the United States Congress established the National Mint. Now, in the manufacturing process of America's currency, what materials are used to print money? Is it A, 25% linen, 75% cotton, B, 50% bamboo, 50% recycled plastic, or C, 100% elephant dung?
I'm going to 100% hope it's not 100%. Based on how much money I've washed and still comes out alive, I'm going to guess A.
Absolutely correct. 25% linen, 75% cotton. Although in certain countries, elephant dung is a fair trade sustainable ingredient. It's true. I was in Malaysia a couple of years ago. We went to an elephant sanctuary and they do sell the dung that is used for paper, which is fantastic.
Interesting. I would have never known that.
Nope. Same here. 2 out of 3 correct. That to me is close enough for a win. So Jeff, we're going to give you that 1 million Dazuki dollars.
Yes. How many dollars is that? Is that about zero?
just north of zero. I don't like to be specific when it comes to this, just because the board of directors is listening. But yeah, so it has no commercial value whatsoever. But excellent job playing on this day in manufacturing history.
We're making history over and over again on this day.
All right, let's move on now. We have our second half of the show. So we've talked a little bit about Shaw Industries and as you got started with your career path. Talk about where you are today and some of the snapshots of a day in the life as a staff engineer.
Let's see, a day in the life. So I thought about this question before right now and had a really hard time answering it for myself because it's so different every day. Some consistent things I do are I'm usually managing multiple projects and the finances change pretty frequently, especially when you make an order, return something, something comes in different. So I do a lot of bookkeeping just for individual projects. And of course, in true want to make sure it all happens fashion, I wrote scripts for that inside of an Excel sheet so that I take what comes out of PeopleSoft and put it in the sheet and then it outputs the answer. That's something that I do regularly once a week, all the time. Something else I do pretty regularly that's basic is Gantt charts are how I live and breathe, similar to how I manage myself. I'm going to manage projects. It's got to happen through a Gantt chart. So they're a little bit fluid. I wouldn't call it the waterfall method because there's very few innovation projects that happen in a waterfall fashion, but pretty much every week, bare minimum once during that week, I've been in the Gantt chart and trying to make sure I've updated, if I missed anything, notes, etc. But then stuff I would do on a daily that probably isn't every week or might even be different is get a phone call at 8:30 that there's a process problem in one of our facilities. And I head down there to troubleshoot who knows what. Just recently it was on heating thousands of pounds of liquid, and it used to be one speed and now it takes a lot longer than it does now. So it almost depends on the day. One of the projects I'm on is basically creating automation for fulfilling customer orders. And every few days, something brand new pops up that we haven't dealt with before. There's a ton of systems that are being integrated with at the same time. So the architecture, while chosen, doesn't mean that everything just plugs in and works.
Right.
So unlike when you go home, and I'm going to use Nintendo again because I love Nintendo.
Yes.
In the 80s, you got a little RF plug and you screw it in the back of your TV, turn the TV to channel 3, and you push power on the Nintendo. And boom, you've got, as long as there's a cartridge in there, something comes up. You don't have to do anything. In an automation project, you have to figure out how to make all of those parts talk. So just creating communication is one of the key points to making the different systems that you've decided are best for their chosen purpose. So your vision, your robots, your PLC, your conveyor, whatever else it might be that you've got going on, all have to talk together. So that creates its own different list of troubleshooting, and it might be different on the day, or we might know it's coming, but.
So you can't do the equivalent of blowing into the bottom of the cartridge, put it back in, and everything works fine.
Oh, I'm going to absolutely 100% tell you that we turn it off and back on again before anything else. But
Step one, 100%.
It usually doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's the complexity that engineering brings. And if you have that kind of brain to be able to troubleshoot like that, it must be rewarding to be able to solve a complex problem like that.
I think it is. Recently, so last November, we were working through a problem of how do we decide what we put in the cell first, and how are we going to decide what's the quickest way to do it, or how do we make these least moves? And I decided I wanted to do that. This sounds like it's up my alley. I've got to solve a problem. And they told me we're going to use ignition. Okay, what's ignition? So I download ignition and put it on my computer. It's got Jython on it. I find out that Python works in Jython. Okay, what's a Python? And I literally sat down in ChatGPT and said, what is Python? Nice. That is where I started in November. But fast forward a few weeks, and after a whole lot of hours, I had a solution, like a working solution.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing didn't used to happen when I was in operations. That's something that I would have only been afforded being in support and being able to get to create it. So getting to have those moments where I'm doing something completely different than I've done before, even though it's similar, and feel like I'm in control of learning as I go.
I wouldn't have thought ChatGPT would fulfill that kind of role, but because I love it so much and use it every day, I'm wondering, where else do you use GPT, if at all?
Man, you can use it for almost anything.
I know.
I recently learned you can put an ASCII drawing into it and it will recognize your system. Oh. So I found a converter to be able to take a drawing of like a floor layout or a piece of equipment and create ASCII and have that conversion be pasted in there, and it tell me like what it is, or ask me questions about what is it you're showing me.
Cool.
So being able to walk through a layout or a process idea, there's so many ways that you can interact with it. And then sometimes I just tell it, like, I got these 2 quotes and they're from the same vendor and something's different. What is it?
Yeah.
I don't want to read 42 pages. Give it what that is, and then give me what the new one is, and it tell me, summarize these differences. And so basically get an executive summary of what has changed or what is different. It's a very different use than trying to learn how to code. But
yeah, the first book I read on ChatGPT was by Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, PayPal, all that. And he said, basically treat ChatGPT as your research assistant and think of it as like your graduate intern who will help you solve problems and be creative and go through processes. And it is my favorite tool. It is worth every of the $20 I spend each month on it.
Oh, I think it's an excellent tool. And I recently wrote an article about what programming used to be like and what programming is like now. Mm-hmm. So when I first started, if you couldn't find a message board or get hold of a rogue manual, and then none of that stuff was easy to use back then. So you could read for weeks to solve what ended up being a really simple problem. But now you can just talk to this interactive thing that feels like you're talking to a person. And it may not understand, but you can iterate to the point that it can teach you almost anything if you're willing to sit and learn.
Yeah, it's incredible. Jeff, hold on one sec. My headphones are dying. All kinds of tech problems today. Got redundancies. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, we're back. Great. Okay, cool. Having now been at Shaw for quite a while, talk about some of the surprises you've seen over the years, things that took you off guard in the industry.
Let's see. So I also tried to think about that question a bit before now, and it was really hard to think of things that really surprised me. And I don't know if that is because I just expect the unexpected to happen, or I just make random assumptions that disaster is supposed to occur. But I do remember a few instances early in my career. We had a big pull roller in a line that sheared like a piece of chalk. And when I say shear, if you put the chalk in both your hands and then twisted one hand and left one stationary, it left that same shear pattern. It just twisted it right off as if it had locked in place, and that motor didn't even think about stopping. It didn't overcurrent, nothing. It just sheared it right off. And that seemed bizarre to me because I thought there'd be some kind of control in place, or maybe notice that it went from pulling 110% amps to 0, but it didn't. And it just absolutely ate right through that shaft like it was chalk.
Wow.
You remember, and this was really personal because I was in charge of a pretty big facilities engineering at this point in time, but we had worked on a line. We'd locked it out. It had been down for a few days. And then when we go to start back up, no heats came up. And so this line has hot oil, and the hot oil boiler comes on and it shows that it's reaching temperature. And then when we go check the cans, there was essentially no heat there. And this went on for multiple days. And on the third day, And this is after 4 different shifts have troubleshot this problem. I've had anywhere from like an operator that, hey, what do you do different than anybody else doesn't do different, to an automation engineer where they've gone through the code, they've seen if we load it correctly, is everything on, basic to extreme. And I decided I'm going to leave what I'm doing and just go walk this line.
Right.
And I don't know what made me think of it, but I was thinking, all right, if I was doing this myself and I don't know anything about it, how do I even start troubleshooting? So I started with lockout, tagout. What do you do to lock out this line? And everything seemed as it was supposed to be. There weren't locks anywhere. Chains were gone. Everything was on. But I got to one piece of that hot oil line where I thought a valve looked weird. It had the stem was almost not exposed at all on this valve. And a gate valve doesn't work that way. If it's open, the stem itself has to be expanded out from where that valve starts. And I was like, I don't think it's open, guys. And ended up having a 30-minute argument that we've already checked this 3 times and it's not open. And all I did is ask him to go get a pry bar and put it between those valve handles to get more torque. And sure enough, 3 days of troubleshooting was nothing more than there was a valve closed. So I would call that was pretty. If I was going to be really surprised, I was really surprised that we've had 4 shifts and 3 or 4 people a shift looking at this, and that just didn't come up.
Yeah, it's like I spend 2 hours looking for your glasses. Oh, they're on my forehead. I didn't realize it.
Yes.
You mentioned Rip Johnson from earlier, one of your mentors. Talk about some of the other memorable people that you've had the chance to work with and what you've learned from some of them.
When I first came in the company and really through till the last couple of years, there was a guy named Chad Anderson. And I don't know if he would consider that he had mentored me, but in my world, he had mentored me. And when I first became a plant engineer, I wanted to learn as fast as I could from people that were already good at it. And he was known as a guy that could do anything in the company. If it moved, blinked, measured, whatever it was, he knew how to handle it. And so I sent him a note and asked for a sit down with him just to, can you give me some lessons learned? And he made probably 2 pages worth of notes with me sitting there talking about, and it was mostly stuff that you don't ever want to do. Like just no, now don't do this. And I did that same thing with Robert Davidson. And Robert's a unique story. I feel like I need to include this point. When I was first interviewing for jobs at Shaw, I was certain that I was going to get picked as project engineer for his plant when it came open. And I went into that interview so confident that I don't even think I tucked my shirt in that day. I was so sure that I had it in the bag.
Nice.
And I answered confidently. I can remember him asking some pretty pointed engineering questions, but I've at that time I had more confidence, I think. Now that I've been exposed to a lot more, I would have less confidence than that guy in that chair did that day. But he didn't hire me. And that was a little bit of the feedback. And I thought, all right, just because you got the right stuff doesn't mean you got the right stuff. So he's someone I called when I got my first plant engineer job. And I wanted him to give me feedback because this guy knew what he was talking about. Looking back, I wouldn't have hired me either. And so he also gave me a couple of sheets of paper and of notes. And so I kept that for years. I still add to it from time to time, but that sheet has grown from these different mentors over the years of things that were just good lessons learned. And I share it with any engineer that cares to read it because it's not like it's proprietary or anything. And some of it seems really silly. Treat people like people. What does that mean exactly? We're all people. So they're not objects like the machines or the processes that you're trying to deal with. And that sounds weird, but as an engineer, really keeping that in mind, hey, that's my mom operating this line, or that's my dad, that's the mechanic out there. I think it's really important. Everybody in manufacturing plays a role at it, getting out the door all the way to sales. Like from inception to the customer, all those people are important. And there's a lot of stuff in those notes from these folks about that.
That is a perfect place to get into our final segment here. We've looked at this whole career journey and these incredible people that have been part of your path. And what we'd like to do at the end of the show is do some creative brainstorming. So call it the lightning round. And here we go. First question is, if you could take a tour of any manufacturing facility in the world, what would it be?
The current manufacturing facility?
Current facility in the world.
It's going to sound like probably what anybody would answer, but Tesla.
Yeah, we do hear that one a lot.
I want to watch a Tesla get made. I think that there's got to be some neat things happening there. I've seen a few teardowns of Teslas, and there's like almost nothing in the vehicle. Once you get down to the wheels, motor, and battery, that's all that's laying there. If you take away the shell, there's not much in it, and then a computer. So I would like to know, how does that work, and who puts it together?
Okay, if you could go back in time and see any product in history being manufactured, what would it be?
I'm pretty sure it would be the central processing unit of a Nintendo, and that was in a Rico manufacturing facility. I don't know. That's probably just because that thing is near and dear to my heart. So I'm like, I would to know how that made and how that was made. And I remember specifically they had a binary coded decimal was removed from that chip because it was used at the time in other applications, and Nintendo didn't want a patent infringement. So rather than change it, they just disabled a feature, and all of a sudden it wasn't an infringement.
I love it.
But yeah, it would be really cool to see where the thing I spent a lot of my childhood in was manufactured.
Yeah. Okay, if you were working on the front line, what would be the perfect music you would be listening to?
Oh, I'm 100% sure this is going to be We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, but as covered by Abandoned by Bears.
Ooh, I don't know that cover version, but that sounds like a much better version than the Taylor Swift version.
Oh, you need to absolutely, right after this, go to YouTube, type Abandoned by Bears, Taylor Swift cover, and watch it. Everything about it is like high school energy, maybe not angry, but just nonchalant. You got to hear it.
Done and done. I'm going right now. Okay, if you were the plant manager with an unlimited budget, how would you design the worker break room?
I immediately have a tiled carpet floor. No hard slick floor. And if it gets dirty, I have an unlimited budget. So we just rip it out and put another one in. I think I would have booths with dividers. But when you go on break, sometimes you feel like you're sitting in a room of a lot of other people, like a high school lunchroom. And you don't quite get that break feel. It's almost like that would have been, if you're extroverted, it's probably great. If you're introverted, there's zero recharge in that area. It would be high-end restaurant style too, something you could wipe off, but it's nice and soft to sit in. And then something that I really wish was in them that I think everybody should have is mini dishwashers. So something you throw in like a microwave, and the dish that you've brought all your stuff in or multiple dishes just clean in 60 seconds, and then you put it back in your pack and you're on your way.
Huge.
Those are biggies that would go in my break room. Oh, and you absolutely have to eliminate the TV playing static with bad news that nobody's watching anyway that happens to be there. It's got to go.
Yeah. Last question. What would be your advice for someone on day one working in the manufacturing industry?
Don't be afraid to do things that you don't feel qualified to do, and look for things that other people aren't wanting to do that are needs at that time. So even though it might be flashy or something that's really cool that a group's working on, being willing to do the things that people have shied away from or that sound really hard. The harder the thing is that it sounds, the better it is to go after it.
I love it. The best takeaways for me, I'll manage me just like I'm a team. And if you run into a brick wall, learn masonry so you can take it down. Spoken like a true engineer. Jeff, thank you so much for being our guest on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And for everyone here at Dazuki, this is Name Tag Scott reminding you that if you don't write it down, it never happened. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Voices of Manufacturing podcast. This show is brought to you by Dazuki, empowering the frontline manufacturing workforce. Check out Dazuki on LinkedIn to listen to past episodes and learn how your team can increase productivity and strengthen employee engagement.